Well, yes, the Chinese are accusing the Americans of running balloons against them now, but what history shows is that the Americans were running balloons against the Chinese nearly 70 years ago. After World War II, the US set up a program. The trial program was called Project Moby Dick, where they used, as an experiment, 500 balloons to carry cameras and other sensors. The concept was to carry them across the Soviet Union, the Eastern Bloc, but also into China. And then that first experimental wave, Project Moby Dick, interestingly enough, set off the original wave of UFO speculation and suspected sightings in southwestern US. A frenzy which has never really abated, but just flares up again from time to time, like now. And then Project Moby Dick was operationalized, and President Eisenhower authorized Genetrix, Project Genetrix, which sent more than 500 balloons equipped with cameras and special sensors across the Soviet Union and into China. Only 10% of those balloons, fewer than 10%, were recovered, but the ones that were recovered exposed in great detail about 8% of the landmass of the Soviet Union and China, and turned up, among other things, a major nuclear facility that the Russians were covertly building in Siberia.
So interestingly enough, they can be effective, but if it was happening decades ago, would the assumption be that the US no longer uses this kind of surveillance? Apparently
so. I'm not briefed on all their covert programs, but it does seem that they gave up using balloons years ago. I mean, the Chinese also accused the Americans, remember, of starting the COVID virus. So, you know, you have to take all of those pronouncements with a large grain of salt. But this program on China's behalf does pinpoint their balloon surveillance technology, if you like, at being 68 years behind the US, which is pretty interesting juxtaposition with the fact that at the very same time that they're using this very old technology, and the Chinese were actually the first country in history to use balloons for military purposes in the 3rd century, in the Han Dynasty, when they used them for military signalling purposes. So they're using a very ancient technology indeed, but juxtapose that with the fact that they are also forging ahead, plunging tens of billions of dollars into the absolute forefront of surveillance and other scientific military projects as well.
So they are, it would seem, intent on a very widespread surveillance network, and we know a lot of countries have been quite alarmed at some of the, you know, cameras, for example, that have been dismantled here in Australia. You would have to say, though, that balloons are not very discreet. Does China not care if they are detected with these kind of surveillance measures?
Well, it seems that they have been getting away with using balloons for surveillance of other countries for some years. We know from the US that the Chinese have been running balloons across their territory with cameras, electronic intercept sensors and other machinery for some years, but the Americans didn't actually pick up on them until they'd already left US territory, and they studied imagery which showed that they'd already been there. The Japanese are now saying, well, those balloons we saw a few years ago and we speculated might have been weather balloons, we wondered what they were, we now realise were Chinese balloons. The Americans say that they've briefed 40 countries now about China's balloon surveillance program over recent years. They seem to have gotten away with it in most countries, maybe partly because they're so high altitude generally, maybe partly because the atmosphere is already full of weather and other balloons of various sorts, and so they're able to hide in plain view, so to speak.
Yeah. As you pointed out, the US has informed 40 other countries. Australia isn't one of them, from what we understand. Should Australia still, though, be concerned about China's desire to have this very widespread surveillance network?
Well, the Australian officials that I've talked to have said that the Americans haven't told them that Australia was known to be subject to this balloon surveillance. Australian officials are launching deeper investigation to go back and see if they might have missed some in past years. But of course, as you imply there, Bev, with your question, it's much bigger. China's surveillance program is much bigger than balloons. You'll remember that the Australian government first stood up to China over the use of Huawei telecommunications gear in Australia's 5G equipment when Turnbull was Prime Minister. The Chinese government has been using Huawei as its preferred global infrastructure provider precisely so that China could surveil all of the world's internet, telephone and other signalling. But they use many other techniques as well. I mean, what the balloon thing shows us is that they're prepared to use all possible avenues to get an advantage over the US and the US alliance system, including the really interesting one, I think, is the one which is called quantum communication and quantum computing, where by some indications China is ahead of the US. Neither country, so far as we know, has yet achieved a critical breakthrough. But if and when they do, quantum computing will allow the first country to break through with it to decrypt any other communication by any other country in microseconds. There will be no secure communication left on planet Earth for whichever country makes that breakthrough first. And with quantum communication, there is no signal to intercept, because you have two atoms vibrating at a distance from each other, and that's the signal. There's nothing in between them. This is the mystery of quantum computing. So again, the country that perfects that first will not be able to be monitored by the other. So the winner of this race will be able to monitor the entire world. The whole world will be visible to them. There will be no secrets, and yet able to communicate in an unhackable manner itself.
Peter, are you going up in a hot air balloon anytime soon?
It's not on the calendar, but it seems to be in vogue. Plus, this latest wave has set up another frenzy of UFO speculation in the US.
Which
apparently
is so crazy.
Unaware of the fact that it was in the 1950s that another balloon program created the very first wave of UFO frenzy in the US. They'll never get over it, apparently.
Yeah, they still have to placate them that there were no aliens in these balloons as they came down. We may all be proven wrong. Great to talk.
Yes, can we be sure?
Who knows? Thanks, Peter.
Thank you, Bev.